Hello, hi, little reminder that we are live on Twitch every Friday and Sunday evenings, so join us if you like the chaos. Also, you can find my book on Amazon, link in description. Thank you very much and I let you with the video.
Case 4, not 3, 4. Nightmare loop. You only realize you've had a nightmare once you wake up. When you are still inside, everything seems absolutely real and uncontrollable. So what would happen if you found yourself trapped in an endless nightmare? Aiden often had nightmares almost every night. He alternated between insomnia and sleep disturbed by horrors. During the day, he acted as if everything was normal, as if everything was fine. He was quite good at hiding his distress from others. No one noticed anything. After all, he smiled, he laughed. Every day, he was active. There was no reason to worry. He was always cheerful. Well, that's what his only friends, thought. Because in reality, it was a completely different story. At university, he was ignored by most of the students, and those who did ignore him made fun of him. He was harassed every day, pushed around the hallways, humiliated in every way imaginable. And all for what? Because he was too tired to respond, remaining emotionless in the face of the hatred hurled at him. Of course, it was destroying him deep down and only added to his exhaustion. But he never let on. But once night fell, it was a different story. He downed energy drinks, sitting in front of his computer. His brain was switched off. Too exhausted after pretending all day, he scrolled through videos and series without really concentrating. He chatted late into the night with his online friends. Most nights unfolded like this, slowly fueled by caffeine, with background noise to keep his brain minimally stimulated. And the next day, he would pretend again that everything was fine, that he wasn't completely exhausted and at his wit's end. It was an endless cycle he'd grown accustomed to. No one was there to stop him spiraling further down this path. He lived alone, far from his family. He wasn't close enough with his friends to invite them over, or perhaps he was simply too ashamed to meet them in real life. But sometimes his body would give out, too exhausted, too overworked. He would then fall into an instant deep sleep that told him just how far he'd pushed his limits. And when that happened, the nightmares would return to torment him until he woke up. Of course, since his body was too drained to wake up with a start, he had to endure his nightmares until the end. An end that usually didn't come until morning or even later. That night was one of those times when his body completely collapsed. After a long day playing his usual role, he fell into bed. He had planned to lie down for just a few minutes before starting work, but his plan quickly changed against his will. The second his body hit the mattress, he was already gone. It was like a sudden blackout. His eyes had closed without him realizing it, and his mind has already fallen into the deepest stage of sleep. When he opened his eyes again, his gaze swept his room as a sigh of relief escaped him. No nightmare this time. What a luck. He didn't have time to rejoice for long because the moment he decided to get out of bed, nothing happened. His body refused to move an inch. No matter how hard he tried, his eyes widened in panic. He was glued to the bed and unable to move. Only his eyes could move, frantically scanning the room. Several minutes passed before he began to hear whispers coming from the closed door of his room. His attention instantly shifted to the entrance. Silence fell abruptly, creating an oppressive atmosphere. Aiden knew instinctively that someone or something was behind the door. He could see the slight movement of a shadow beneath it. He lived alone and had no pets. There was no reason for anyone to be with him in the apartment. His heart was pounding so fast and hard that he felt he could hear it. Still paralyzed, he could only wait, his breath trembling. Slowly the doorknob turned until the door opened a crack. Aiden held his breath, preparing for the worst. He was right to do so. A shadow slipped silently through the opening. An almost human body, easily 2 meters tall, with long slender limbs. Its hands were adorned with long sharp claws that scraped against the wooden door, leaving an impressive scratch in their wake. The creature was imposing, towering over Aiden. Its eyes were of a shining red were upon him, crushing him with an invisible pressure, a demon. Aiden was convinced it was one of those demons that came to possess you in your sleep. He could see no other explanation. He wasn't religious, but it was all he could cling to at the moment. So he began reciting verses from the Bible, the ones he could remember. He frantically mumbled biblical passages, hoping it would drive the demon away. Unfortunately for him, it had no effect. The demon continued to approach him with an almost painful slowness. The creature was playing with Aiden's nerves, and it was working perfectly. Once the demon had overpowered him, it leaned close to his face, far too close. The creature's breath was icy as it struck Aiden's face. He then raised his hand under Aiden's horrified gaze. The demon pressed one of its long claws against the young man's chest, watching his face contort as it dug into the skin. The deeper the sharp claws sunk in, the harder Aiden clenched his teeth. He could feel the pressure on his chest, then the pain spreading as the claw pierced him. When his face twisted in agony, the demon's grin broke into a wide grin. He reveled in the pain he inflicted and the fear he instilled. The demon's long claw finally pierced Aiden's chest completely, tearing a scream of pain from him. Suddenly, he felt gravity pull him down as if he were falling from a great height. He woke with a start in his bed, breathless. Aiden frantically scanned the room, searching for the demon, but there was nothing there. His hand instinctively went to his chest, searching for an injury, but his skin was smooth and immaculate, with no trace of blood or wound. A nightmare, it was just a nightmare. He sank back into bed with a sigh of relief. He was glad he'd managed to wake up before the dream ended this time. It took him a moment to collect his thoughts. Then he sat back down, running a hand over his face to wake himself up a little more. The nightmare had exhausted him. He felt as if he hadn't slept at all. He then dragged himself to his bedroom door to leave. But the moment his foot reached the hallway, everything went black. When the lights came back on, he was back in bed as if he hadn't moved at all. He froze for a moment, his gaze sweeping the room as he tried to understand what had just happened. Cautiously, as if some misfortune might befall him with the slightest sudden movement, he got out of bed again. He tried to reason with himself. His mind was surely playing tricks on him because of his fatigue. So he tried to leave his room once more. The same thing happened, a black veil over his eyes, then he was back in bed. He tried to experiment several times before finally admitting the truth. It was impossible for him to leave his room. Each time he tried, he was automatically teleported back to his bed. It was strange and incomprehensible, another dream. He paced around the room, wondering how to get out. After a long while, too long for his liking, nothing had changed, so Aiden decided to act before he went crazy. Staying locked in his room and just waiting was out of question. He didn't really know why, but he absolutely had to get out of there, like an instinct he couldn't ignore. So he headed toward the window. Perhaps this exit was still viable. He opened the window and slid onto the sill, a space too small not to be dangerous. Every muscle tensed as he held onto the wall tightly, climbing down. Aiden couldn't get far before his mother appeared at the window, watching him from above. "What are you doing?" she asked, frowning. "It's dangerous. Come back inside." Aiden hesitated. It was impossible to get out of the room through the door, so I climbed out the window, he explained, realizing how ridiculous it sounded when he said it out loud. His mother held out her hand. "I don't know what's wrong with you today, but come back inside before you fall," she said, waiting for him to take her hand. He hesitated for a moment, then took his mother's hand and climbed back up to the window. He hoped that the ordeal was finally over. Maybe he was finally awake and everything would be normal now. His hopes were quickly reduced to nothing as he reached to the window. About to return to the room, his mother's expression suddenly shifted from worried to utterly disdainful. It hardened to a chilling cold as she gripped Aiden's other arm. "Are you alright?" Aiden asked, sensing that something had changed in his mother, and not for the better. "You're nothing but a huge disappointment," she said coldly before shoving him sharply. In surprise and confusion, Aiden didn't have time to grab into the window sill before he fell. His gaze met his mother's indifferent eyes just before his body hit the ground hard. The impact was brutal, the hard floor straining his spine and knocking the wind out of him. A sharp pain shot up his back as a muffled groan escaped him. Aiden squeezed his eyes shut, praying that none of this was real. When his eyes snapped open, he sat bolt upright. He was back in his bed, in his room, another nightmare. He sighed with relief that lasted only for a few seconds before the reality of the situation hit him. He was trapped in a series of nightmares that would only end with his death. However, now that he was aware he was dreaming, he could control the dream, couldn't he? He stood up, ready to face whatever nightmare came his way. The problem was doubt lingered. How could he be sure he was actually in reality or dreaming right now? His first reaction was to pinch his arm, no effect. When he looked around, he saw nothing out of the ordinary or that seemed unreal at the moment. He headed for the door, hoping he could finally leave the room. Unfortunately, his subconscious had other plans. The moment he touched the doorknob, a strange black thread emerged from his bed and wrapped itself around his arm. Aiden's eyes widened in astonishment. He began to pull at the thread, which wouldn't let go. It was incredibly strong. This was his dream. He had to be able to control it. He concentrated as hard as he could, trying to imagine the thread disappearing. "It's not real, it's not real," he repeated aloud for emphasis. Nothing worked. The thread remained firmly attached to his wrist, no matter what he did. Aiden began to panic and tried to free himself with all the strength he could muster. Another thread emerged from his bed and gripped his other wrist. Then another targeted his leg, and yet another until the threads were gripping him from all sides. He was then pulled toward the bed. Despite his fierce resistance, the threads were far too strong and firmly attached. Aiden found himself tied to the bed, unable to move, struggling in vain against the black threads. The harder he fought, the tighter the threads wound around him like snakes. Then a final thread emerged from the bed and wrapped itself around his throat, instantly cutting off his air. Driven by pure survival instinct, he struggled furiously, but it changed nothing. The thread tightened around his throat until he was suffocating, desperately trying to breathe. His eyes welled with tears as his vision blurred. In seconds, he had lost consciousness. When he awoke, he was still in the same room, not a single thread inside and no trace of injury on his body. He sat limply, catching his breath. The nightmares might not have been real, but the pain he felt each time was very real. And each nightmare left him a little more exhausted than the last. Please let this be real this time, he prayed into the void with little hope. His hopes were quickly dashed when a scratching sound came from behind the door. A shadow could be seen in the doorway, but this time Aiden was fully aware that this was just a dream, and he could move. He wouldn't be fooled. As quietly as possible, he jumped out of bed and hid in his wardrobe. He had decided to fight. He would wait for the right moment to pounce and eliminate any creature that infiltrated his room. If he could avoid further pain, he was willing to try. While he figured out how to wake up, he waited, hidden in the wardrobe as the scratching intensified. Then, with a soft click, the door opened, and sounds of footsteps echoed in the room. The sounds of footsteps and metal blades scraping against the floor, several blades. Aiden frowned. The sound was like long metal blade, which was definitely not a good sign. He held his breath, not moving an inch, as he peered at the intruder through the small gap between the two wardrobe doors. He had to force himself to stifle a cry of horror when the stranger entered his field of vision. A tall man, too tall for the room itself, so he had to keep his back hunched. His long silver hair cascaded to the floor in a train. Each of his fingers was replaced by long sharp blades that left deep scratches on the floor in their wake. The sight was terrifying enough to paralyze Aiden as he prepared to act. Hesitation was too much to bear in the face of the immense monster examining his room. How could he possibly defeat the monumental monster like that? Defending himself against a dozen blades was harder than it seemed, impossible. Aiden took a desperate gamble, and instead of fighting, he chose to flee. He waited until the monster was far enough away from before gently opening the wardrobe door. He leaped out of the cabinet and ran straight for the exit, hoping the monster wouldn't see him. Obviously, this was wishful thinking. The moment he jumped out of the wardrobe, the monster automatically turned in his direction, its eyes fixed on him. Before he could do anything, one of the monster's blades slammed into the wall directly in front of him, blocking his path to the exit. Aiden ran to the opposite direction even though he knew he was trapped. He still tried to avoid the monster as much as possible. The monster was far faster than him. In a fraction of a second, it had already plunged the 5 blades of its hand into Aiden's stomach. The blow was swift, without hesitation. It took Aiden's mind a moment to register the information and feel the pain of all the blades piercing him from both sides. His vision was already blurred and his breathing was labored. He was seized by a violent coughing fit, blood rushing up his throat, pouring from his mouth and crashing to the ground. Several labored, wheezing breaths, and then complete darkness. He collapsed into the pool of his own blood, his body a mass of suffering. This death was slow and painful, infinitely more so than the previous one. Perhaps it was because the other nightmares had exhausted him. After a long agonizing ordeal, he finally succumbed completely, only to wake up in his bed once more. He sighed, his energy drained. But when would he finally awaken from this endless nightmare? Why couldn't he control anything even though he was fully aware that nothing was real? And above all, why did each of the monsters seem to have no other goal than to kill him? Most nightmares were frightening, but to be constantly killed over and over again was utter torture. Heavily, with no energy left, he tried to sit up. His body didn't move. He was glued to the mattress. Oh no, not again. His eyes scanned the room, searching for the demon he had already faced. This time there was nothing, not a movement. Suddenly, a trapdoor, which had never been there before, opened in the ceiling directly above him. A blinding light emanated from it, so much so that Aiden couldn't see anything on the other side. He squinted to avoid being too blinded by the light. For a long moment, nothing happened. He could do nothing but wait. His body was paralyzed in bed. Then slowly, something fell from the trapdoor. Aiden had trouble seeing what it was at first. He only understood when these things landed on his bed and began to move. Earthworms. They fell on him and wriggled. Aiden watched them settle on his bed without really reacting. Compared to all the monsters he had faced so far, small insects weren't very impressive. And that was even more terrifying because it meant something even worse was about to happen. After the earthworms came the millipedes. Like the others, they dropped right on him and wriggled. A shudder of disgust ran through him as he felt them touch his skin and move across it, and he couldn't get them off. Then it started to rain. Different kinds and size of insects invaded his bed and swarmed over his skin. Some had fallen onto his face, which he also couldn't move. The number of insects were becoming overwhelming. They were everywhere and didn't seem to want to budge from the bed. The worst happened right after. The rain of insects changed into a rain of snakes, imposing reptiles that drastically increased Aiden's fear level. He had a slim hope that the snakes were harmless, but deep down he knew what was about to happen. The reptiles crawled over him and coiled around his limbs. One of them slithered up his torso. Aiden's eyes widened in panic as he saw the snake's head approaching dangerously close to his own. He felt things were about to escalate and tried to force his body to move, but it was no use. He remained motionless beneath the insects and snakes. The one that was approaching his face didn't seem inclined to change course. He moved so slowly it was a torture, his apprehension growing and causing his pulse to race. Finally, the snake coiled around Aiden's neck. The young man's eyes widened in panic as the reptile tightened its grip. Aiden's breath caught in his throat, enough for him to open his mouth in the hope of getting some air. It was the worst thing he could have done. As soon as Aiden's mouth opened, insects, especially cockroaches, took the opportunity to swarm inside. Aiden could feel them swarming inside his mouth, his eyes filling with tears. The creatures moved down his throat, making him suffocate even more. They continued to enter relentlessly, their sound ringing in his ears as they scurried down his esophagus. Aiden coughed, choked, and couldn't breathe. The difference between this nightmare and the previous ones was that each time he felt like he was dying, he could come back to life the next second, only to be tormented by the insects again. The process repeated itself several times before he finally woke up in his bed, seized by a coughing fit. The insects were gone, as was the trapdoor in the ceiling. He was finally out of the nightmare, the worst he had experienced so far. It took him a moment to recover, his eyes glazed over as he cleared his throat. It was as if he could still feel the insects swarming inside, even though they were no longer there. He couldn't take it anymore, it was too much. He wanted to return to reality and never sleep again. He was exhausted and didn't know how he could cope with another nightmare. "This has to stop," he murmured into the void, his voice weary. He listlessly got out of bed, no apprehension or fear remaining within him. Come on. What was the point of being afraid of dying when he knew he would wake up and immediately enter another nightmare? Perhaps if he stopped fighting it, the nightmares would come one after another until he finally managed to wake up. He just wanted it all to end. Although he wasn't sure what he would do once he was awake in reality. After what he had just experienced, he probably wouldn't sleep another wink that night. How could he even sleep again, knowing he risked returning to an endless nightmare? When he snapped out of his thoughts, he glanced around, surprised by the silence that reigned. No monsters, no insects, nothing strange or out of the ordinary. He expected something to fall on him at any moment. He slowly got out of bed and walked to the door. He hesitated for a moment before opening it, convinced something would stop him again, but nothing happened. Only the soft click of the door echoed as it opened. With paranoid caution, he stepped into the hallway. Again, nothing strange happened. With a sigh of relief, he walked through his apartment to the kitchen in complete silence. He barely dared to breathe, afraid it would trigger another nightmare. He froze when he reached the kitchen. Obviously, it couldn't be that easy. The shadow of a man stood in the middle of the room. The figure was imposing and wore a white mask that concealed his face. The stranger held the knife in his hand, twirling it menacingly in the air. At his wit's end, Aiden simply let out a weary laugh. "Just one more, go ahead and kill me so we can get this over with and move to the next one," he said. There was no more fear, no more hope of escape. He had simply accepted his fate, to be tortured and killed again and again, and in this endless loop of nightmares. The masked man approached Aiden. The knife was poised to slice. Aiden didn't move, he didn't even look away. "I'm waiting for you, nothing is real anyway, nothing but phantom pain. My real body is safe and sound in my bed, and I've dealt with far worse than this knife. So go ahead, I can't wait to move on to the next one." Aiden mocked, his voice utterly resigned. The masked man didn't wait before violently plunging the blade into Aiden's stomach. Aiden closed his eyes, waiting for the peak of pain that was supposed to follow the blow. To his great surprise, he felt nothing. When the young man opened his eyes again to look at the blade embedded in his stomach, he was speechless. The knife was firmly planted in his body, but he felt nothing. Not a single drop of blood flowed from the wound. It was as if Aiden was made of air, and the blade had passed right through him without causing any damage. His gaze lifted to meet that of the masked man, who seemed confused by Aiden's lack of reaction. The young man struggled to understand what was suddenly happening. How could he feel nothing after so much pain and torture? Had he finally managed to gain control over his nightmares? Perhaps his mind had finally realized that none of it was real. To test this theory, he clenched his fist and punched the man facing him directly in the chest. The enemy was thrown forward until he crashed violently into the wall. the impact creating cracks. Aiden couldn't help but smile excitedly across his face. He was in control. The masked man fell to the ground, unconscious and motionless. That's when Aiden heard the familiar scraping of metal blades against the ground. When he turned, he was once again facing the monumental monster with hands adorned with razor-sharp blades. The monster's gaze was fixed on him, menacing. But this time, Aiden didn't flee. He was ready to fight. For once, he wasn't going to just endure and wait for it to end. No, he was going to react and fight back. The monster attacked without hesitation, its blades slicing through the air. But just as they should have sunk into Aiden's body, they began to melt. The young man breathed a sigh of amazement. He was beginning to understand how to control this dream world. He simply had to be truly convinced of something, as if it was real, for it to become real. So he looked the monster straight in the eyes. "You're nothing impressive, you're tiny," he declared confidently. The gigantic monster then shrank until it was the size of an insect. Without hesitation, Aiden crushed it under his shoe. "I hate insects," he commented. His confidence had never been so high, but here in the dream world, he was in complete control. He was safe. As Aiden excitedly contemplated his new abilities, footsteps pulled him from his thoughts. His eyes then fell upon the demon, the first of one of his nightmares. The demon stared at him curiously, as if examining him. When it drew closer, Aiden tried to use his new ability to make it disappear. Unfortunately, it only made the demon laugh. "Sorry, that won't work on me," the demon commented, amused. Aiden frowned in confusion. "Why? I managed to control everyone else." A smile spread across the demon's face. "Why? Because I'm the one who gave you your power," he explained. Aiden was speechless. "Why? Because I'm the one who gave you your power," he explained. Aiden was speechless, completely bewildered. Bewildered? What? He breathed. The demon leaned against the kitchen counter, observing Aiden intently. "I heard prayers, the ones you repeated in your mind at night. You begged for your life to change, to improve, and I came to offer you that chance." "By torturing me in my dreams?" Aiden asked, incredulously. "It was a test. My power isn't for everyone. Few would be able to use it without dying a stupid death. The recurring nightmares pushed you to your limits to see if you had the strength to control this power," the demon explained. "And if I hadn't succeeded, you would have died," the demon replied, as if it was a minor detail. Aiden grabbed a chair and slumped down into it. It was hard to imagine such a situation unfolding, but he was willing to believe it if it meant he would never have nightmares again. "So I can control my dreams now?" he asked, desperate for a clear confirmation. The demon let out a blood-curdling laugh, his sharp teeth gleaming in the light. "You should be more ambitious than that, Aiden. I've given you the power to control your own dreams, but also to enter and control those of others," the demon announced. Aiden's eyes widened. He had total control over anyone's dream. It was as improbable, I can do it, as it was dangerous. "What do you get in return?" the young man asked suspiciously. The demon's smile broadened. "Clever, I see. All I ask in return is that you give me 10 lives. Once those lives are sacrificed, your power will become permanent. You have 2 weeks, the demon declared. "What? I can't do that," Aiden exclaimed, feeling incapable of killing anyone. "The choice is yours. Either you sacrifice the 10 lives and keep your powers, allowing you to finally sleep peacefully, or you refuse and your power disappears, leaving you to suffer your endless nightmares again. Aiden remained silent for a moment. He didn't want to sacrifice lives, but he truly couldn't take the nightmares and insomnia anymore. "I will get arrested by the police if I do that," he sighed in despair. The demon let out a blood-curdling, thunderous laugh. "The police? No. I forgot to mention something about your power. If you injure or kill someone in their dream, then that person dies in reality too." Aiden's head snapped up, and he stared at the demon in shock. "I'm giving you a chance, Aiden. Don't waste it on a matter of morality. Imagine all you could do with this power. Imagine how peaceful your nights will become. And if you're wondering who to sacrifice, it seems to me a few bullies could disappear from this earth. Don't you think?" The demon mentioned, knowing very well what he was doing. Aiden's face flickered with doubt and temptation. The chance to take revenge on his bullies was tempting, but was he ready to go so far as to kill? He remained silent, the question swirling in his mind, and unanswered for the moment. I will give you 2 weeks, the demon repeated before everything went black. When Aiden opened his eyes again, lying in his bed, he knew he wasn't dreaming anymore. He could feel it. He was truly awake this time. He sat up and examined his room. It was still dark. All was quiet and still. Had all of this really happened? Was the demon real? Power too? During the day, he wandered around the university without really paying attention to anything. The demon's words repeated endlessly in his mind. Deep down, he truly hoped it was real. He desperately wanted nights free from nightmares and insomnia. He dreamed of only one thing, finally having a peaceful night's sleep. As he walked down one of the university corridors, a broad-shouldered student bumped into him. It wasn't an accident, the jostling was intentional, judging by the force involved. Aiden looked up to see Zane Buckley, his eternal and most fervent bully. Zane was laughing, giving Aiden a mocking look. "Sorry, you're so insignificant, I didn't even see you," Zane mocked. Aiden didn't answer, but an idea sprouted in his mind at that precise moment. Why not test his power on Zane tonight? He deserved it after all. So once night fell, Aiden settled into bed. It was the first time he'd ever been so eager to close his eyes. He focused on Zane's face with all the hatred he could muster, praying that his power was real. As he felt himself drifting off to sleep, Aiden sensed the atmosphere shift. He cautiously opened his eyes to scan his surroundings. He was in one of the university's classroom, almost empty. In the corner of the room was Zane. He was holding a girl in his arms and kissing her passionately. Had Aiden succeeded? Had he infiltrated Zane's dream? It certainly wasn't the kind of dream Aiden would have had, so yes, he must have been inside Zane's dream, dreaming of kissing a girl that was typical of someone like Zane. So he could control what was happening. He focused his attention on the girl his bully was holding. It only took a second for the beautiful young woman to transform into a creature that was half insect, half corpse. Aiden had a vivid imagination. When Zane realized the change, he screamed and shoved the creature as far away from him as possible, with an horrified expression. "You don't like insects either. That's a shame for a cockroach of your kind," Aiden commented. He'd never dared speak to Zane like that, with such confidence, but he was in control in his dreams. Nothing could happen to him, so why tremble before a bully he could do anything with? Zane's eyes fixed on him, hatred replacing the previous shock. "What did you call me?" "A cockroach," Aiden repeated, his voice steady. Zane lunged at him predictably. Luckily, Aiden knew what to do. Black threads shot out from the wall, gripping Zane on either side before dragging him and pinning him against the wall. Aiden had drawn on his own experience. "You can't do anything to me here. I'm in control of everything," Aiden declared. As peaceful as he was by nature, seeing Zane at his mercy gave him an unparalleled pleasure and satisfaction. "Thank you, Mr. Kraft, and hello, Mr. Kraft. Welcome." As peaceful as he was by nature, seeing Zane at his mercy gave him an unparalleled pleasure and satisfaction. "Hello, Mr. Kraft." "Go to hell, you're nothing, just a pathetic, lost weirdo," Zane yelled, his usual insult. Aiden clenched his fists, the wires following the movement to wrap more tightly around Zane. One of the wires went around the stalker's neck. What stalker? No, the bully's neck. "Do you know what your problem is? You talk way too much," Aiden said. The wire tightened around Zane's neck until it made it hard to breathe, but not quite cutting him off completely. No, after everything Aiden had been through, he wanted to take his time and make Zane suffer. The bully desperately tried to take deep breaths to catch his breath. His frantic eyes watched Aiden's every move with keen apprehension. For the first time, Zane was terrified of his victim, and Aiden reveled in that fear. "It's a good thing we're in a classroom. There must be a pair of scissors somewhere," he said. He knew perfectly well he'd find some, since he'd conjured them up just by thinking about it. He reached into the compartment of one of the desks, his hand closing on a pair of scissors, which he triumphantly showed to Zane. The bully's eyes widened in panic as he struggled in vain against the black wires that held him immobilized against the wall. Aiden approached him slowly, knowing how much apprehension would torment Zane until he acted. He then opened the scissors to examine one of the blades. "This might hurt," he said. Aiden himself was surprised by his own sadism, but not disgusted. He felt strangely good. He then drove the blade onto Zane's arm, watching his face contort in pain. "Remember the day you spilled your scalding coffee on my legs? I had a burn for weeks. Or the time you smashed my head against one of the lockers, the one with the broken door, the edge folded back just enough for the metal to cut through. I still have the scar on my forehead. Maybe it's time you regretted all that." Zane was overcome with panic. Wait, that was stupid of me. I'm really sorry, okay? I didn't think you would actually get hurt. Believe me, I just wanted to play a little joke," Zane stammered, his voice trembling. "Wrong answer," Aiden declared. He then drove the scissors into Zane's skin again and again, into his arms, his legs, his stomach, hard enough to draw blood. Absorbed by the task, Aiden didn't stop, continuing to slice relentlessly while listening to Zane's cries of pain and futile pleas. Then suddenly everything went silent, not a single scream, and Zane's body fell heavily. Aiden realized he wasn't even breathing anymore. He was dead after enduring countless cuts. The next day, Zane's death was all over the news, a young man dead in his sleep without any explanation. The ultimate proof that Aiden's powers were real. That very night, Aiden slept peacefully without nightmares, the kind of sleep he had always dreamed of, but never had. Something he risked losing within 2 weeks if he didn't quickly find 9 more lives to sacrifice. Determined to maintain his power, Aiden continued. He targeted his tormentors one by one. He drowned one, slit another's throat, through one of the building, and left yet another to freeze in an ice bath. It was easy to do anything and everything in dreams. And the best part was that his victims could never retaliate. When the count of 9 lives was reached, it was time for Aiden to sacrifice his final victim. He had saved the best for last, Cassie. She was a girl he had fallen in love with in his freshman from university. She had led him to believe that she liked him back and had pretended to be dating him, all to humiliate him in front of the entire university one day. She had claimed that Aiden was nothing more than a creepy stalker who harassed her and tried to force things on her, which was obviously untrue. Aiden was far too shy to even touch a girl. Simply holding a girl's hand embarrassed him. But once the rumors had started, it was too late. No one listened when he tried to defend himself. Everyone preferred to believe the beautiful and popular Cassie rather than Aiden, the strange, perpetually lonely boy. It was mainly because of Cassie that no one had approached Aiden since. He resented her so much, he wanted her to suffer the way he had. That night he infiltrated Cassie's dream, not surprised to find her sunbathing on the beach with a martini while countless men hovered around her, catering to her every whim like servants. He approached Cassie with a determined stride. "You seem peaceful here," he said, catching her attention. She gave him a disdainful look. "What are you doing here? Get off my beach." She signaled to the group of men to remove Aiden, but before they could make a move, they were all reduced to a pile of sand. Cassie's eyes widened in shock and fear. She started to get up and run away, but Aiden was faster. In a fraction of a second, chains were around the young woman's sun lounger, forcing her to remain lying down. "It's time you suffer like the others," he announced before a bag appeared in his hand. He opened the bag to find breadcrumbs and a jar of honey. His prolific mind had outdone itself. Once again, he poured the honey over Cassie without hesitation before throwing the breadcrumbs on top as she struggled in vain. She wouldn't escape. Aiden positioned himself a little further away to observe the scene. Soon, seagulls landed on Cassie's body to peck at the breadcrumbs. The birds didn't stop at the bread, however, as their beaks began to tear Cassie's skin piece by piece. She screamed at the top of her lungs and thrashed about, desperate to free herself, but the birds continued their feast, pecking at her skin, her eyes, anything that was offered to them. Cassie died after a long agonizing death filled with cries and pain, and Aiden had reached the required number of sacrifices. He would finally be able to sleep peacefully, free from nightmares, forever. And this is the end of the story.